By the way, it seems that Paul's only junior had been complaining to others about how poor his leadership was, to the point that he couldn't even consider him a boss. Paul overheard this, and they are currently in the midst of a dispute. He should have known how important it is to take care of your own junior. As for me, I had been offered a position at our overseas headquarters. I had been declining due to the current circumstances and out of consideration for Paul. But I finally decided to take on the opportunity. I'm currently preparing for my transition. I've been causing my father some worry, but we've started practicing video calls so we can keep in touch when I'm abroad. I am content because I'll be able to pursue the job that I have been dreaming of since I was a child. It's time to give it my all. Paul hardly ever helped with household chores, but Michelle didn't mind. When they went out together, Paul always took charge, letting Michelle relax and enjoy herself without any worries. It felt like they had a good balance in their relationship. However, everything changed when Michelle's mother passed away. While Michelle was at work, her father called to tell her that her mother's health had gotten worse and she had collapsed. Michelle rushed to the hospital and said her final goodbye to her mother. She decided to stay with her father to arrange the funeral. When she called Paul, he said he couldn't leave work suddenly. He missed the wake and only made it to the funeral, but it seemed like he hadn't prepared to dress appropriately for the occasion. I had to quickly find him clothes to wear, but he complained a lot, saying I should have done it earlier. With all the sadness and business of arranging the funeral, I couldn't handle Paul's complaints, so I ignored them. But he didn't seem to appreciate that and stayed in a bad mood. Since then, it feels like we've been arguing more in our marriage. It's normal to have disagreements after being married for 3 years, but lately, Paul has been picking fights aggressively. He's always telling me what to do and taking charge. I got tired of it and tried saying no a few times, but he didn't know where things were in the house. So simple tasks took a long time. Plus, he complained while trying to help, making an even bigger mess. Eventually, I realized it's easier if I just do everything myself. I didn't always do everything Paul asked. I handled some things myself to make my life easier. I mentioned preparing for my mom's first death anniversary gathering next week. Okay, I said, and Paul grumbled, oh, I have an important meeting that day. What should I do? I've told you about this gathering well ahead of time. How could he suddenly say he couldn't make it? What? You're not coming? Paul let out a heavy sigh. It's not that, but it'll be hard to leave everything to my subordinates, you know. He seemed pleased with his recent promotion and often talked about his junior team members. I felt like sighing right along with him. Please make arrangements for it, all right? I stressed. It was the day before my mom's first death anniversary gathering. When I returned home from work, Paul was sulking in the living room, drinking beer. Sorry, I'm late. Had to do overtime, he mumbled. I figured he was upset because I was late, delaying dinner. I've been waiting here for an hour, just as I expected, but it's only an hour, right? If he couldn't cook, he could have bought something. I did tell him when I'd be home. He could have taken some initiative. Holding back my frustration, I handed him a takeout box. I thought cooking would take too long, so I got this on my way home. In response, Paul slammed his beer glass on the table. Takeout again? Aren't you slacking off a bit too much lately? The last time I got takeout was about 2 weeks ago. Sure, I've been busy, and maybe I haven't been cooking every day, but still, I make sure to eat balanced meals and avoid relying on packaged food too much. Even though I don't think I deserve criticism, as I debated whether to respond, Paul, misunderstanding, added insult to injury. Can't argue when it's true, huh? Do your chores properly. You've been coming home late and claiming overtime. Maybe you're out cheating. Paul's words ignited the resentment I've been feeling. If you know I'm working late, the least you could do is make dinner. You don't have to cook. Picking up takeout isn't that hard. I always tell you when I'll be late, and even with my busy schedule, I handle all the household chores. There's no need for that attitude. Paul glared at me. You're 3 years older, remember? I could have married a younger woman, but I chose you, Paul said, expecting gratitude and obedience. You should be thankful and listen to me. No one else would want you, so you'd be in trouble if I left, right? Did he really just say that? I was furious and couldn't hold back. If you wanted a younger woman, you should have married one before we got together. I asked if you were okay with me being older, and you said yes. That's why we got married. Even without you, I can manage my life. Paul laughed mockingly. Fine, let's get a divorce. With that, he grabbed his beer and takeout and went to his room. We've argued before, but this was different. I was done with him. I decided to eat my takeout to calm down. Maybe he was just hungry and annoyed, I thought as I ate, but I couldn't shake the disbelief that this was happening the day before my mom's death anniversary. After a while, I called out to Paul from outside his room. "We need to leave by 8 a.m. tomorrow, so I'll wake you up around 7. There was no response, but I felt he was awake. With that said, I went to bed. The next morning, when I woke up early, Paul was already gone. The bags I packed were still in the room. He hadn't left for the gathering without me. Where did he go? I called his phone, but he didn't pick up. He didn't respond to my texts either. With no other option, I left a voicemail and started getting ready to leave alone. I finally reached Paul while waiting for the train at the station. "I have a meeting. Can't leave it to my juniors," was all he said before the call ended abruptly. I was overwhelmed with a mix of anger and resignation, feeling stunned and bewildered. Before I could dwell on it further, the train arrived, burdened with luggage meant for two. I boarded alone. Upon reaching my father's house, he asked anxiously, "Where's Paul?" Seeing my father's sadness since my mother's passing, I didn't want to add to his worries. Taking a deep breath, I forced a smile and replied, "Sorry, he got called into an important meeting. He was supposed to come, but with his recent promotion, it sounded crucial, so I encouraged him to prioritize it." My father nodded in understanding. "I understand. He's working hard. It's disappointing not to see him, but your mother would understand. Let him know he's always welcome here." His words stung a bit, but I maintained my smile throughout the day. With no word from Paul and the night growing late, I didn't reach out to him either. Planning to stay the night and return home the next day as planned, I saw no need to contact him. Though it felt childish, I thought about making him his favorite dish, hamburgers, tomorrow. With that in mind, I went to bed. The next day, I left my father's house and got home around noon. Before going grocery shopping, I wanted to drop off my bags. As I entered the living room, I saw Paul had left dirty laundry lying around, as usual. I sighed, thinking he still hadn't learned how to use the washing machine, and tossed his laundry in with mine. Taking a break and returning to the living room, I noticed something on the table. As I got closer, I couldn't believe what I saw: divorce papers already signed by him. "Why?" I stared at the papers in disbelief. Was this his way of asking for a divorce? I grabbed my phone from my bag. It should be Paul's lunch break. I wasn't sure if he'd answer, but to my surprise, he did. As soon as I called, I asked, "What's the meaning of these divorce papers?" Paul laughed and replied, "What's there to question? It's exactly what it seems. I don't want an older wife who won't handle household chores. That's why I want a divorce. If we split, I can find a younger wife. After all, a wife is like a status symbol, right? I can't boast about you because you're older. It's tough when my team asks about you, and avoiding the topic isn't easy." I was speechless, unable to respond. "If you want to avoid a divorce, start doing your chores properly. I'll be home as usual today, so make sure to get some beer, alright? If you disagree, take the divorce papers to court. It's your call." With that, he hung up, leaving me in shock, unable to utter a word. Paul probably assumed I'd comply if he said that. I only did the chores because I disliked having to ask or beg him. He must have believed I did it to keep him from leaving me. Perhaps he thought I wouldn't stand up to him because he's the dominant one. Being married to a younger husband might seem glamorous to some, but in reality, there's nothing remarkable about it. I often emphasized his youth, but in truth, he's average in looks, personality, and income. There's nothing particularly special about him. Labeling him as younger was simply convenient. When we married, I worried about the age gap, but now that we're both in our 30s and he's just 3 years younger, it doesn't seem significant. If there were a larger age difference between us, perhaps I feel differently. It's disheartening to constantly be labeled as the older wife when we're practically the same age. Determined to take action, I grabbed my bag and headed straight to the family court. Submitting the divorce papers brought a sense of relief, signaling the end of our relationship. I realized I could live without Paul. With newfound freedom, I felt lighter and decided to request a few days of paid leave from my boss. Luckily, work had just slowed down, and he granted me a week off. Now divorced, I needed to organize my belongings. With minimal possessions, cleaning up was a breeze. I stored larger items in a storage unit, packed essentials and clothes in my car, and spontaneously decided to visit a hot spring resort. Since it was the off-season, I found a cheap hotel for my stay without any hassle. Driving with excitement, I indulged in the hot springs and relaxed in my room, only to be interrupted by a ringing phone. "Michelle, I asked you to get beer, didn't I? Where are you?" It was Paul's usual time to return home. I chuckled, recalling his words. "I'm at a hot spring resort." "What? A hot spring resort? Why? What's going on? Didn't you say to file the divorce papers if I didn't agree with you?" I pictured my ex-husband flustered, and my laughter grew. "Wait, did you really file them?" "Yes, I did." "Why?" "It was your suggestion, Paul." "Have you forgotten what you said earlier?" His tone became perturbed. "Wait, are you joking? When you say hot spring resort, do you mean some nearby spa? If so, I'll get dinner, so come home soon." I couldn't help but laugh at the sudden, seemingly caring tone as he claimed to be a considerate husband. It took about an hour and a half of driving. There's even an outdoor natural hot spring. It's so relaxing. I hope it doesn't rain tomorrow. Since you're going to get your own dinner, I've already packed my things so you won't have to worry about me coming back. Take care of yourself. Paul begged me to return, but I had no intention of going back. You're the one who initiated the divorce. Have you forgotten? It was obvious you were using divorce as a threat to control me. I told you, I can manage without you. Now that you've divorced your older wife, go find a younger one. Whether you can or not, I don't know." Paul fell silent. "It's none of my business, but you should consider moving out of that apartment too." Finally, Paul spoke again. "Why should I?" His voice was barely audible. "Think about your income. You'll go broke soon if you keep living there. You can't clean, do laundry, or cook. You'll need housekeeping and dining out, right? That costs money. It would be a problem if most of your salary went into rent. You thought you were the provider, but my salary is nearly double yours. You never provided for me. If anything, it was the other way around. Also, you were overconfident just because of one junior. But did you know I have multiple juniors under me and even more under them? I don't usually talk about work because Paul gets moody, but I outrank him in both position and salary. You'd think he'd notice after living together, but it seemed like he was fine finding out now. Perhaps Paul, being dominant and proud, kept his ego intact by looking down on me. Now that he can't, he must feel defeated. I've shattered his pride as payback for all these years. The reason I handled household chores without complaining, despite your domineering behavior, was partly because you were younger, and I cut you some slack, and partly because it was too much hassle to ask you for anything. It's not like I needed you to stay with me. I was just taking care of your needs along with mine. So when you said, do the chores or we divorce, of course I chose divorce. We're strangers now. Goodbye then. I said what I needed to and hung up. Feeling refreshed, I savored the hotel's food afterward. As expected, Paul sought reconciliation, but I replied with a smile. I'm older than you. I'm sure you don't want me back. Presumably, he wasn't successful with younger women. Eventually, Paul gave up and moved out of the apartment. I hired a lawyer for the division of assets, demanding more to compensate for the burden of household chores imposed on me until now. Paul, being cheap, didn't hire a lawyer, so I had the upper hand. With my lawyer, we reached an agreement with favorable conditions for me. By the way, it seems Paul's only junior had been complaining to others about his poor leadership, to the extent that he couldn't even see him as a boss. Paul overheard this, and they're currently in dispute. He should have realized how crucial it is to support your own junior. As for me, I've been offered a position at our overseas headquarters. I initially declined due to the current circumstances and out of consideration for Paul. But I finally decided to seize the opportunity. I'm now preparing for my transition. Though I've caused my father some worry, we've started practicing video calls to stay connected when I'm abroad. I'm content knowing I'll be pursuing the job I've dreamt of since childhood. It's time to give it my all. Mommy, I heard my daughter's voice filled with surprise and panic. Desperately, I tried to cling to my fading consciousness, but it was no use. I fainted right in front of her. When I came to, I was in a hospital bed, having been rushed to the ER. My daughter was there, clutching my hand tightly, refusing to let go. I must have given her quite a scare. Filled with guilt, I was about to apologize when she spoke first. Mommy, the baby in your tummy says they don't want to be erased by Daddy. At her mysterious words, I held my breath in surprise. My name is Linda Williams. I'm a 27-year-old homemaker living with my husband, Mark, who is 2 years my senior, and our 4-year-old daughter, Sarah. I used to work as a sports trainer until recently when I had to quit. The reason? I'm expecting our second child. I really didn't want to quit, but after discovering my pregnancy, I started feeling unwell more often and had no choice but to leave. I was depressed after quitting a job I loved, but there were some silver linings. Mark, who hadn't been very helpful with housework or childcare before, started taking the initiative for my sake. Despite my worries about my health, I was glad to see him changing. At that time, I thought everything would be okay. "Mommy, wake up, it's morning." I woke up to Sarah's innocent voice. It was 7 a.m. and the school bus for her daycare arrived at 7:30. I jumped up in a hurry. "Shoot, Sarah, we need to get ready quickly." "What's wrong, Mommy?" "We overslept. If we don't hurry, the bus will be here." While rushing around, brushing Sarah's hair, and leaving the room, I realized I hadn't seen Mark anywhere. He usually left around 7:15 a.m., so he should still be home. Maybe he's downstairs having breakfast. A little annoyed that he didn't check on us, I headed for the stairs. That's when it happened. I slipped and felt the momentary sensation of being thrown into the air. Instinctively, I reached out for the handrail and managed to grab onto it, preventing myself from tumbling down the stairs. That was close, I thought, putting my hand on my stomach. Thankfully, I hadn't hit it, and it didn't hurt. Just as I breathed a sigh of relief, Sarah, looking pale, rushed over. "Mommy, are you okay?" "I'm fine, honey. Sorry for scaring you." Regaining my footing, I embraced Sarah. Just then, Mark, who must have noticed the commotion, rushed over from downstairs. "What happened?" I slipped and almost fell down the stairs. "Whoa, be careful." "I'm sorry, but it was like the floor was slippery. And the floor seems cleaner than usual." I hadn't noticed until now, but the wooden floor in the hallway was sparkling as if someone had polished it. Then Mark, in a flustered manner, said, "Oh right, I waxed the floor last night." "Wax? Why would you do that all of a sudden?" I noticed it while cleaning and got a little too excited. "I'm sorry." "I see," I replied, surprised at the idea of him waxing the floor, something he had never done before. But he had been doing a lot of housework recently, so perhaps he had started noticing the little things. Once men start paying attention to details, they just can't stop, can they? Even though I found it a bit strange, I decided not to worry about it. A few days later, on a Sunday, Mark had to go to work, so I decided to take Sarah to the park, just the two of us. Before, I would run around and play with Sarah, but I can't do that now. I watched her playing on the swing, a water bottle Mark had prepared for me in hand. Who would have thought that Mark would start preparing things like a water bottle for me? When Sarah was first born, Mark was so uninterested in anything to do with the house. It still brings tears to my eyes when I think about it. He also had no interest in Sarah, and every time I said something to him, he got grumpy and started coming home from work later and later. The fact that he now prepares a bottle of water for me is still a shock, but I can't hide how happy it makes me. Thinking about this and feeling a bit thirsty, I decided to take a sip of the tea Mark had prepared for me. Then suddenly, "Mommy?" Sarah's voice cut through my thoughts. After drinking about a quarter of the bottle, I suddenly felt dizzy and began to feel unstable on my feet. I grabbed onto the fence of the swing for support, but even then, I could feel my strength fading, and it became increasingly difficult to stand. "Mommy, what's wrong?" "Ah!" I tried to respond, but my voice was weak. "Mommy, Mommy." Hearing Sarah's surprised and worried voice, I felt a wave of guilt and fear wash over me. Desperately tried to hold on to my fading consciousness. If I faint here, I'll leave Sarah alone. Despite this thought, I fell to the ground, instinctively protecting my stomach. When I came to, the first thing I saw was a stark white ceiling. For a moment, I couldn't understand where I was, but then the smell of disinfectant and the sight of a nurse approaching brought clarity. "Are you all right?" she asked, and I realized I was in a hospital. Instantly, I thought of Sarah. "Excuse me, Sarah, do you know where my daughter is? She should have been with me when I fainted," I said, sitting up and asking the nurse. She seemed to understand immediately and smiled reassuringly. "She came to the hospital in the ambulance with you. She should be with your husband now." "My husband?" "Yes, he left work early to come here. He arrived a little while ago. He's such a caring husband," the nurse said before leaving the room to call them. Feeling relieved that Sarah was not alone, my head started to spin again. and I collapsed back onto the bed. Why did this happen when there were no issues during my previous prenatal checkups? Was it because I moved around too much, or did I eat something bad? As these thoughts swirled in my mind, I suddenly remembered the tea from the water bottle I drank just before fainting. Come to think of it, that tea. Just as I considered this, the door opened and the nurse returned with a Dr. Mark and Sarah. Mommy. Sarah, I'm glad. I'm sorry for leaving you alone, I said, reaching out to embrace her. I'm okay, but what about you, Mommy? Are you okay? Sarah asked, her voice filled with concern. Yeah, I'm all right now, I replied, patting her head gently. The doctor smiled at me. In the end, it was decided that I would be hospitalized for 2 or 3 days. After a thorough examination by the doctor and nurse, they left the room. I'll go buy a drink, Mark said. Then he too left, leaving just Sarah and me in the hospital room. Sarah seemed a bit restless, as if she wanted to say something. What's up, Sarah? I asked. Mommy, can you keep a secret from Daddy? She asked. Huh? Okay, but why? I replied, curious. Although I wondered why she was asking, I nodded in agreement. Sarah brought her face closer to mine, wearing a serious expression. The baby is saying they don't want to get erased by Daddy, she whispered. Huh? I was momentarily speechless, unable to understand what Sarah was saying. She pursed her lips in dissatisfaction and spoke a little louder. The baby is saying Daddy's being mean and the tea in the water bottle. At these words, I was taken aback. I too had sensed an unusual bitterness in the tea from the water bottle. At the time, I thought maybe Mark had bought a different type of tea than usual and didn't give it much thought. But now, considering the dizziness I felt just after drinking it, I started to wonder if there was a connection to my fainting. What does she mean by the baby is saying? Just as I was about to ask Sarah more questions, Mark came back into the room. Hey Sarah, I'm sorry I'm late. The cafeteria was crowded. I swallowed my words in surprise, and Sarah seemed uncomfortable, burying her face in the bed. Mark looked at her with a puzzled expression. Something happened? Nah, it's nothing, I replied, trying to sound casual. Well, whatever. I'm going home for today, Mark said. I have to work tomorrow, so just rest up, okay? Mark said as he took Sarah's hand and left. My daughter showed a momentary reluctance to leave. Let's go home with Daddy today. Mommy is staying at the hospital. Okay, Sarah replied, following him without saying anything more. I couldn't help but feel uneasy about her. Was Sarah really okay? I was worried, but there was nothing I could do at the moment. I needed to focus on getting discharged as soon as possible, so I crawled into bed. However, I couldn't fall asleep easily. Sarah's puzzling words kept running through my mind. 3 days later, I was finally allowed to be discharged. Since Mark was working, my friend Kimberly came to pick me up. Kimberly was a friend from the gym where I used to work. She had been looking after me since I quit due to my health condition. I was shocked to hear you have fainted, but you seem to be doing much better than I thought. I've been sleeping so well in the hospital that I feel much better, I replied. I'm glad. I was worried because you're pregnant, Kimberly said as we drove home. While having this conversation, I felt a bit uneasy inside. I had been constantly feeling sluggish and heavy-headed, but the discomfort improved in just a few days. The only unusual things I had done during that time were taking a break from housework and childcare and eating a balanced diet in the hospital. As I thought about it, I suddenly realized something. I hadn't eaten Mark's cooking for the past few days. I remembered there had been several oddities since Mark started doing housework. Besides almost slipping on the wax floor, other things had bothered me. For instance, items were placed in unusual spots, causing me to trip. I was told the shower was ready, but when I stepped in, the hot water tank was empty and cold water came out. Such incidents occur frequently, especially in winter when cold water came out. I rushed to the hospital out of concern for the baby in my belly. Fortunately, there were no problems, but it was a nerve-wracking experience. At the time, I thought these were just mistakes due to Mark's inexperience with housework. However, reconsidering now, each incident seemed like something that could lead to irreversible consequences if one thing went wrong. Landa, we're here. Ah, yeah. Before I knew it, we had arrived at the house. Seeing my silence, Kimberly looked at me with worry. If you're feeling sick, you should say so, okay? Yeah, I will, thanks. You should rest for today at least. I'll pick up Sarah, okay? Thank you, I appreciate it. As we got out of the car together, I thought to myself that I should talk to Sarah properly once she was back. In the evening, Sarah returned home with Kimberly, who had even bought some deli food for dinner. "Call me if anything happens," Kimberly said before leaving. She was like a superhero. I silently jumped for joy in my mind. Having dinner with the deli food Kimberly bought, I felt unusually well and decided to talk to Sarah again. "Can we talk a bit more about the other day?" I asked. Sarah nodded seriously. "Can you talk to the baby in my belly, Sarah?" I asked. "Yes," Sarah nodded firmly. It was hard to believe, but I felt that there was no falsehood in her words. "Then can you tell me again what the baby is saying?" "The baby is scared of Daddy." "Why?" "Daddy is trying to hurt us on purpose and separate Mommy and the baby. So the baby is clinging to Mommy with all its might." I was at a loss for words at this revelation. Her words, though clumsy, connected the dots I'd been feeling. Everything that felt off might have been deliberately planned to harm the baby. Feeling this, I shivered. "Mommy, what's wrong? Are you in pain?" "Sarah, I'm sorry. I'm okay." Seeing Sarah's tearful face, I hastily embraced my little girl. I made a decision in secret. I have to find solid evidence or no one will believe this. The next day, after watching my husband leave for work, I started my search. I pulled something out from the back of the closet, a baby monitor we used when Sarah was an infant. If this reveals what he's doing, if it shows what I feared. The thought was so frightening. But if it showed nothing, that would be okay too. With a small hope in my heart, I hid the camera behind a houseplant. A few days later, I mustered up the courage to check it. I can't believe this. It's too awful. What was captured there was unimaginable enough to shatter my small hope. I made up my mind. I absolutely won't forgive this. A week or so passed since I saw the footage. I left my daughter Sarah at my parents' home earlier in the day, then tidied up the entire house and prepared a perfect dinner before Mark came home. Mark, who finally came home, was surprised to see the lavish meal set on the table. "What's going on? I could have made dinner." "I can't let you do anything dangerous anymore," I replied. "Huh? What do you mean?" I didn't miss the flash of caution in his eyes. "I mean exactly what I said. What have you been feeding your pregnant wife all this time?" "I don't get it at all," he said, trying to sound innocent. "My health has improved significantly since I stopped eating your cooking for the past week." "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked, slightly shaken. "I had pretended to eat your cooking and threw it all away." When I told him this, he looked even more unsettled. Also, when I checked around the house, I noticed the non-slip pad under the rug was missing and the anti-tip device on the bookshelf next to the bed was removed. I got goosebumps when I found these. These weren't just targeted at our baby. It implied I was also a target. When I glanced at Mark, his mouth was twitching as he tried to force a smile. Now that I think about it, there was a time when body wash had spilled on the bathroom floor after a shower and things fell from shelves. If I had fallen and hit my stomach, it would have been a disaster. "Those are just coincidences, right? Maybe it just made a little mistake," he said nervously. I thought so too until I saw this. I thrust my phone in front of his face and played the footage recorded on the baby monitor. There was Mark talking on the phone with someone, and his voice was clearly recorded. I get it, but it's not going as planned. It's surprisingly hard to make a person disappear in an accident. Well, two people. It would be best if the baby in the belly could disappear too. Those words from the video sent chills down my spine no matter how many times I heard them. Watching Mark, I saw he was trembling slightly, unable to hide his fear. Despite being wary, I continued to speak. "The person on the phone is a woman, isn't it? Once I'm gone, you're planning all these things with her, things too disgusting to even mention. You're spying on me like this. I'll sue you. How dare you? Do you even understand what you've done?" Mark shouted. "Just shut up. Just shut up." No longer able to find excuses, Mark's face turned bright red as he lost control and lashed out at me. Instinctively, I hunched over to protect my stomach. Just as I did, a loud bang sounded, and the next moment, I heard Mark scream. "Landa, are you okay?" "Kimberly, thank you." I looked over in relief to find Kimberly, who had easily subdued Mark and was laughing. In fact, she's a strong woman who has won the national wrestling tournament multiple times. For the day, I had asked Kimberly to stand by in the next room just in case. Mark, pinned down by Kimberly, was already red-faced and bellowing. "You think you're alive because of who? Me, right? Yet you annoy me with demands to play with the kids and help with housework. If you all would just disappear, I could live freely. Just get lost for my sake, you idiot." So that's what you think. But thank you. Ha! Actually, you just helped me a lot by self-destructing. Saying so, I thrust my phone, which was in call mode, in front of Mark. The call was to 911. Actually, it had been in this state for a little while before, so all of Mark's words had gone straight through to the police. Please, not the cops. Mark was struggling to escape, but Kimberly had him firmly pinned down, and he couldn't move. I'm sorry. I was wrong. Please, I apologize. Forgive me. That's not something you can get away with just by apologizing. What you were about to do. Don't say such things. While Mark was thrashing around, the sound of several footsteps and a voice saying, "We're coming in," echoed as police officers entered through the already unlocked door. In no time, Mark was taken away. Even on his way out, Mark was pathetically clinging to me and pleading, "Help me." A subsequent investigation revealed the plan by Mark and his mistress. Their objective was to eliminate me, who was in their way, so they could be together. Even if they failed to get rid of me, they were contemplating a story that the loss of our child due to my carelessness would lead to divorce. Moreover, if they could blame it on me, they thought they could claim compensation at the time of divorce. The sheer audacity of it all leaves me speechless. Even now, when I think about what could have happened if I hadn't noticed anything, it still sends chills down my spine. Mommy, the baby is happy. She says she can always be by your side. When I went to pick up Sarah, she said that right away. Yes, I'm so glad. It's all thanks to you. I thanked my daughter from the bottom of my heart, and tears of relief flowed. Mommy, why are you crying? The baby is looking forward to meeting you. I'm also very excited. About a month after Mark's arrest, our divorce was finalized. A few months later, I gave birth to a healthy baby girl. Sarah is overjoyed at her sister's birth and has now become a very reliable big sister.